Churchill only wages this war against the German people to save the British Empire.
He was Hitler's final hope, a young general with a reputation for brilliant improvisation and loyalty under pressure. But as the Third Reich disintegrated, he had to choose between blind obedience to his Führer or a desperate mission to save lives. Was he a hero, a rebel, or a man caught between impossible circumstances? This is the last stand of Walther Wenck, Hitler's final hope. Let's find out. In the spring of 1945, World War II was coming to a devastating end. Adolf Hitler sat in his bunker in Berlin while Soviet forces were closing in, and the Third Reich was days away from collapse. But Hitler still believed that one man could change the course of events. General Walther Wenck, the boy general, known for his ability to rescue hopeless situations. Hitler issued a desperate order. Wenck's 12th Army was to march east, link up with the trapped 9th Army, and break the Soviet stronghold on Berlin. On paper, it sounded darling. In reality, it was impossible. The Soviets had overwhelming numbers, artillery covering every approach, and Berlin was already a city in ruins. Wenck knew this wasn't a mission that could be won. It was a death trap. But instead of blindly following orders, Wenck decided on a different plan. One that wouldn't save Berlin, but would save thousands of lives. To understand why Wenck defied the Führer, we need to see how he became the man Hitler trusted. Wenck's journey started in a Germany already in turmoil. He was born on September 18, 1900, in Wittenberg, the son of a Prussian officer. Military discipline shaped his upbringing, and by the time he joined the Prussian Cadet Corps in 1911, Germany was preparing for World War I. Like many young men, Wenck dreamed of a long military career. But those dreams were crushed when Germany lost the war in 1918. The Treaty of Versailles reduced the country's military only to 100,000 soldiers, and many officers were left without jobs. Wenck refused to give up. In 1919, he joined the Freikorps, a paramilitary group fighting to maintain order in the chaos of post-war Germany. This period taught him how to survive and adapt under extreme pressure, skills he would use throughout his career. By 1920, Wenck had transitioned to the Reichswehr, the small but highly disciplined army of the Weimar Republic. The limited size of the army meant every soldier had to be flexible and capable in multiple roles. Wenck thrived in this environment, becoming skilled in leadership, planning, and strategy. His early experiences prepared him for the rapid changes that would come when Adolf Hitler took power in the 1930s. Once Hitler began rearming Germany, Wenck's career accelerated. By 1939, he was chief of operations for the 1st Panzer Division, just in time for the invasion of Poland. This campaign was the first real test of Germany's blitzkrieg strategy, fast-moving, coordinated attacks that overwhelmed the enemy. Wenck was in charge of planning and organizing key operations, ensuring that the army's movements were efficient and effective. The invasion of Poland was a success, and Wenck's role earned him recognition. He was awarded the Iron Cross, 2nd class, and soon after, the 1st class. But this success was just the beginning. His next challenge came during the invasion of France in 1940, where he played a key role in capturing important strongholds like the heavily defended city of Belfort. Speed and precision were essential, and Wenck's ability to think on his feet kept German forces ahead of their enemies. His careful planning helped the army break through French defenses quickly, ensuring a fast advance that overwhelmed opposing forces. By 1942, Wenck was no longer just a frontline officer. He became an instructor at Germany's War Academy, where he trained the next generation of officers in modern mechanized warfare. His job was to teach future commanders how to combine speed, firepower, and strategy in fast-moving battles. But this wasn't a theory-based role. Germany was fighting a massive war, and the tactics Wenck taught had to be practical and effective. His time at the academy didn't last long, though. The front lines needed experienced leaders, and Wenck was soon sent back to the battlefield. This time, to the Eastern Front, a place that would test him like never before. The Eastern Front was a brutal, unforgiving theater of war. As Chief of Staff for Army Detachment Holet, and later the 1st Panzer Army, Wenck faced challenges far worse than anything he had encountered in Poland or France. The winters were freezing, with temperatures so low they could disable tanks and vehicles. Soviet partisans constantly ambushed supply lines, cutting off food and ammunition. The Red Army launched attack after attack, refusing to give the Germans a moment to regroup. The winter of 1942-43 was especially devastating. Soldiers suffered from frostbite and hunger, and morale was at an all-time low. Wenck had to manage his forces with limited resources while facing an enemy that was growing stronger by the day. Even with the overwhelming conditions, Wenck remained calm under pressure. His leadership inspired confidence in those around him, and his strategic thinking earned him the respect of his peers. At just 42 years old, he was promoted to general, making him the youngest general in the German army. This earned him the nickname the Boy General, but it wasn't just his age that made him stand out. Unlike many older officers who stuck to rigid military doctrines, Wenck understood that success on the Eastern Front required flexibility and quick thinking. He wasn't afraid to change tactics to fit the situation, a quality that allowed him to survive longer than most. But by 1944, even Wenck's adaptability couldn't stop the change. The Red Army had regrouped and was launching powerful offensives that forced the Germans into retreat. The once dominant Wehrmacht was now struggling to hold onto its position as Soviet forces pushed westward. Wenck's role during this time often involved organizing strategic withdrawals and creating temporary defensive lines. He was responsible for making sure retreats didn't turn into chaotic routes, and his efforts helped prevent complete disaster on multiple occasions. Wenck was also known for his blunt honesty. When he delivered reports to his superiors, he didn't hold back or sugarcoat the situation. His updates often described the reality of the front in stark terms, and his superiors both respected and feared his briefings. During one infamous meeting with Hitler, Wenck described the German defenses as Swiss cheese full of holes. It was a brutally accurate description of how weak their lines had become. While many generals would have hesitated to speak so frankly, Wenck didn't shy away from the truth. Hitler reprimanded him for the informal language, but he secretly valued Wenck's honesty in a room where most officers were too afraid to deliver bad news. Later in February 1945, Wenck's life took a dangerous turn. He had been appointed Chief of Staff of Army Group Vistula under Heinrich Himmler. Even with limited resources, he managed to organize small counterattacks that temporarily delayed Soviet advances. But his grueling schedule of daily 320-kilometer round trips to attend Hitler's briefings took a toll on him. One night, Wenck fell asleep at the wheel of his car and crashed, suffering a fractured skull and broken ribs. Even then, he insisted on returning to duty after a brief recovery. On April 10, 1945, Wenck was given what would be his final and most difficult command, the 12th Army. Positioned near Elbe River, his task was to defend against the advancing American and British forces. But the situation on the ground was far more complicated. Refugees fleeing the Soviet advance poured into his sector, creating a humanitarian crisis. Wenck's army took on the additional responsibility of providing food and shelter to over 250,000 civilians. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler's mental state had deteriorated. On April 21st, he ordered Felix Steiner to mount a counteroffensive against the Soviets encircling the city. But Steiner's forces were too depleted and the plan failed. In desperation, Hitler turned to Wenck as his last hope. The order was simple. Wenck's 12th Army would march east, link up with General Theodor Busse, and break through the Soviet lines to rescue Berlin. But Wenck knew the truth. Berlin was already lost, but he followed orders initially, leading his forces toward the capital. They fought their way through small towns and villages, but as they approached Potsdam, the resistance became overwhelming. Soviet forces were entrenched, and their artillery fire was relentless. By April 27th, it was clear that Wenck's mission had failed. The Soviets had fully encircled Berlin, and no relief was possible. Wenck reported to the German Supreme Army Command that continuing the attack would only result in more deaths. At this moment, Wenck made a critical decision. Instead of obeying Hitler's orders to continue a futile assault, he chose to prioritize saving lives. He redirected his army south, toward the forest of Halbe, where Busse's 9th Army was trapped, along with thousands of civilians. His new mission was to break through the Soviet lines and create an escape route for as many people as possible. The escape through the forest of Halbe was a brutal and dangerous operation. Soviet artillery pounded the area constantly, and air raids targeted the roads and river crossings. But Wenck's tactical expertise allowed him to identify weak points in the Soviet defenses and exploit them. His soldiers worked tirelessly, building makeshift bridges, securing passageways, and guiding civilians under cover of night. For the refugees, the journey was harrowing. Families carried whatever they could, often leaving loved ones behind as they fled through dense forests and muddy fields. But Wenck's leadership was a beacon of hope. He wasn't just giving orders from a distance. He was on the front lines, ensuring the success of the operation. By early May, thousands had crossed the Elbe River and reached the safety of American-controlled territory. Estimates vary, but historians believe Wenck's actions saved anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands' lives. On May 7, 1945, Wenck himself crossed the Elbe and surrendered to American forces. His military career had ended, but he had accomplished something extraordinary. In defiance of Hitler's orders, he had chosen humanity over obedience and saved countless lives. After the war, Wenck spent 2 years as a prisoner of war before being released in 1947. He built a new life as an industrialist, working with companies like Dr. C, Otto and Company, and the Deal Group. In 1957, he was offered the position of Inspector General of the Bundeswehr, but declined due to disagreements over the role's authority. Wenck lived a quiet life after the war, but his legacy remains a subject of historical debate. Was he a hero for saving thousands of lives, or merely a soldier doing his duty in the face of defeat? His decision to defy Hitler set him apart from many other high-ranking officers, making him a figure of enduring fascination. That's it for the story of Walther Wenck, the boy general who defied Hitler and saved thousands. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to check out more stories about World War II's forgotten heroes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.